Hey, 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 what's the fuss and tell me what's happening. This is Pyromaniac Mo coming at you with a live fantasy football talk. Today, I've been graced once again with Mat Harrison. He can be found on Twitter at Explosive Output. He is a writer and digital experience manager at League Safe and League Safe Post. He can be heard on the podcast Fantasy Football Almost Daily and the nation's longest-running fantasy football radio show, Fantasy Football Weekly. How are you, Matthew?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. And I would like to say you have a special place in my heart. You were the very first interview I ever did, and you've been gracious enough to come back for more. You are a mountain of charity, sir.
Yeah, you get the big names after me, though. I'm just the leadoff batter. Then you get the heavy hitters like John Tuvey and Mike Clay and all those guys. So I'm happy to be the leadoff hitter.
I've talked to them, but I come back for you, man.
That's right. Well, I'm top of the order.
Well, tell me what's new in the League Safe world these days?
At League Safe, we've been working on a new league site called Safe Leagues, where you can actually go find a paid money league to play. We offer third-party commissioner service. So to make sure everything's on the up and up. And one of the things we talked about in the last interview is we actually offer Empire Leagues, which is something that nobody else can offer, or nobody else is offering, really. Empire League, just to kind of go back on it, is it's a dynasty league, a full-on dynasty league. You hold everybody on your roster. And when a person wins the championship back-to-back in consecutive years, they get a rolling Empire pot. The rolling Empire pot that we do for our home league for the office is 50% of our pot goes to yearly winners and 50% of the pot goes into the rolling Empire pot. So as you can imagine, the money gets kind of big pretty quickly if half of your pot's going into this rolling pot that somebody's going to win. So yeah, if you win 2 years in a row, you end up taking down a pretty big payday. In the Office Empire League, we're going into year 4. I am the reigning champion right now, but I'm also sitting on Jordy Nelson, Le'Veon Bell, LeGarrette Blount, and Antonio Gates. So it's not looking good, at least for the first couple weeks. So
ouch,
tough sledding in that league. But yeah, so Safe Leagues offers Empire Leagues. There's actually a league where you can play with me. It's called the 1T Challenge. I think we have one spot open in it. It's going to be an email draft, and that's just going to be a redraft league. But there's a handful of other leagues out there where you can play against some of the guys from League Safe and Fantasy Football Weekly. You kind of just have to monitor their Twitter accounts because we send out private links for those. But there's also a handful of just public leagues that we have, both Empire and Redraft. We offer auction, we offer email draft, and we offer live draft. So all run through the good folks over at MFL. We got a nice little skin on our league over there. It looks really clean and clear and crisp. Yeah, we like it quite a bit. It's doing pretty well so far.
That's awesome. My buddy D-Rex and I believe it was on Pyro Light Podcast 3. We talked about the Empire League. We gave you guys a shout out, you and Paul Chargian, Christian Peterson. And what a great idea that is. Keeps everyone in a vested interest throughout the year, and it can certainly stack up. The money can be well worth it in the end. You guys also did something else kind of cool. It was the Fantasy Football Training Camp. That was a very big event there in Minnesota. Tell our listeners what goes on at the training camp, both on air and off air.
So yeah, we do Fantasy Football Training Camp. This was, I believe, our 7th year of doing it. It was the 4th year that I was involved in it. And this year we did, in the past couple of years, we've done some local Minneapolis bars, a couple of really nice big venues for bars. The Poorhouse was a really nice one, had a nice stage, fit about 400 or 500 people. But what we were finding is we were running out of space because people wanted to come to this free event. And so this year we moved up to Mystic Lake Casino's big 2,000-seat showroom. I think we ended up with about 600 or 700 people who showed up, but it's a free event, and we do our Fantasy Football Weekly radio show from 10 to noon. And then from noon to 2, we do kind of a deep dive PowerPoint presentation, super nerdy stuff. I highlighted fast starts for schedule for some of the fantasy players at different positions. John Tuvey did a good examination of offensive lines. Christian Peterson always does a presentation on the analysis of a sleeper running back, how to find a sleeper. And he seems to unearth a guy who's on the verge of a big breakout. Like DeMarco Murray was his big guy last year, and man, that really worked well for him. So yeah, it's kind of a deep dig into some of the little subtle things that we can't really show on the radio because it requires visual aids, basically. So it's a whole bunch of nerdy people like you and I sitting in a room, taking notes on a notebook, going, "Oh, this is great. This is great. I got all the stuff I need." And really you come out of it with a better sense of what's going to happen at the beginning of the season. I think we do a really good job with it.
That's fantastic. Geek is chic, as they say.
That's right.
So two questions. One, what was one of Christian Peterson's sleepers? And two, tell me your off-air analysis. As you said, you did an examination of the schedule, particularly the first 5 weeks. Give me a synopsis of that. So give me a sleeper there that Christian Peterson picked, and the synopsis of what you covered about the early schedule.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. He highlighted so many running backs, and I wasn't really paying attention. At that time, I was drinking some Grain Belt beer and socializing with some people. I'll have to go back and check out his presentation. I think the presentations will be available on KFan.com, and Grain Belt beer is the big title sponsor for the event. And I believe Grain Belt has I think it's called Football Friendly or Friendly Football, their website, which also holds the Crush Charge Challenge, which is a free contest you can play at grainbelt.com. I believe the presentations will be at both of those places. If they're not up now, I'm guessing they'll probably be up by the end of the week. So,
well, we certainly believe in drinking over at Pyro. So it's the AM hours, so we're not drinking right now, but Grain Belt Premium can be our brewery of the day. So.
Oh, yeah.
What did you talk about, the examination of the early week schedule?
It revealed a lot of interesting things with my schedule analysis. I mean, we can go position by position. The Packers are in for some trouble this year, especially in the early going. I know they've started 1-2 or 2-2 the last couple of years. And as you can probably see, I'm a Viking fan, so that pleases me a little bit. But they have a pretty rough schedule for quarterbacks and a pretty rough schedule for running backs to start the year. So Aaron Rodgers and Eddie Lacy, although they're very good, probably first or second round picks, they're going to run into a tougher schedule to start the season than most people would like. I'm not sure that you downgrade them that far because of the opening week schedule, but if you're planning on taking Rodgers or you're planning on taking Lacy, you want to look at your other players, and you don't want to take a risk with those other players as well. What I was kind of telling the people in the training camp was, let's not have 3 or 4 of these players that I mentioned that are going to get off to rough starts on your roster. Because if you have 4 of them, you're probably going to lose 4 or 5 of your opening games, and then you're panicking and maybe selling low in the trade market, and that's totally not something that you want to do at the beginning of the year, or really anytime. You don't want to sell low. So,
well, Lacy had kind of the same deal last year. He had a rough start. First 4 games on our scoring system, he was under 12 points.
Yeah, he has a rough start again this year. They get the Bears in week 1, and that's a nice, easy schedule for them. But after that, I'm grabbing the data right now. He has kind of a rough go. He gets 4 straight top 10 run defenses after that: Seattle, Kansas City, San Francisco, St. Louis. Obviously, San Francisco is probably going to take a step back this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lacy has kind of a tough go once he gets out of that first week against Chicago.
Now, chances are you guys will do the opposite, guys, or upside down drafting, where you may not end up with Lacy.
Yeah, I probably won't.
So knowing that you are an upside down drafter or do the opposite, where you're going for the top tier quarterbacks, tight ends, wide receivers, give me a running back in rounds, 4 through 9, a couple running backs that you are targeting as an do the opposite drafter.
I think Chris Ivory is a good one to target this year. I really think that the Jets are going to actually give him the ball and make him a bell cow back there. Schedule-wise, he's got a middle-of-the-road schedule. So, and the Jets are actually one of the toughest teams in their division against the run. So he doesn't have to obviously face the Jets. So that's a good thing. I like Joseph Randle. And I'm kind of a do the opposite drafter, but this year I've kind of modified it a little bit. And my draft strategy really is I want to get 2 top flight wide receivers in my first 3 rounds, possibly in my first 2 rounds, because I think that the drop off at wide receiver is tough after that. I want to go late on quarterback, and I want to go late on tight end, and I want to fill up a lot of running backs and high end wide receivers in my first maybe 10 rounds. So I would probably guess that in a traditional draft this year, if you're watching me draft, it's going to go wide receiver, running back, and then insert wide receiver or running back for the next 6 rounds and just try to build a good base that way. There's enough good quarterbacks out there in a 1 quarterback league that you can get away with playing the matchups, having Carson Palmer as your starting quarterback, who's got a good start at the beginning of the year and had a pace of 4,400 yards last year had he stayed healthy. So, and tight ends, if you don't get Gronk, the drop off is pretty huge after that. So, if Gronk's not available to me, I'm probably waiting and probably going with one of those sleeper guys that you can kind of get late.
Absolutely. I'm the same way. Late round QB, I have no problem streaming tight end, like you say, unless you get Gronk. I'm hoping for a top 5 running back, and after that, I'm going to lock up some of the best wide receivers I can, maybe 2, maybe 3, and then late round running back lottery tickets, 5, 6 running backs, as many as I can load up on. Hey, we always ask folks to kind of give us a peek behind the curtain. So give me a resource that you yourself use during the season. It could be a website. It could be an app. Maybe even it's a unique stat or a data point. I had Pat Thorman talking about some Vegas data points. That was his go-to. What's one of your go-to things during the season?
I like to use, well, I think I pimped them a little bit last time, but Fantasy Football Today is a good, solid website that's got clean, easy to use, easy to sort stats. You can kind of find your way around it. It's fftoday.com. They do really good work. It's the easiest way to find the stats that you need to at least start your research. Pro Football Focus is obviously a really good one. They have some deep statistics on some of the wide receivers that I really like. ProFootballReference.com is also a good one because they have some search functions that you can find some really interesting statistics within that.
Those are about my 3 main ones as well.
Yeah.
Good calls. Hey, in the news recently, we've had some big news hit the fantasy world, particularly in the way of injury. I've got some interesting numbers thanks to my buddy Jake Davidow from Sports Injury Predictor. In fact, I tweeted a link to this story. In fact, I heard John Tuvey talk about it. But essentially, 66% of all players injured in the preseason in the last 2 years were then re-injured during the regular season.
Yeah,
now, there's a caveat to that. Some of those dudes are 4th stringers, so their chance of re-injury is not as high. They're not as out there as much. But 1st stringers, if they're injured in the preseason, they have a 77% chance of getting re-injured. With that said, a guy like LeSean McCoy, he's going to miss the remainder of the preseason. He was going at the tail end of the 1st round, according to Fantasy Football Calculator. He's now in the 2nd. How do you feel about McCoy once the season gets rolling, both his chance of re-injury and basically overall performance?
One of the things that we did at Fantasy Football Training Camp is we do a quote-unquote experts / celebrity mock draft where a couple of all the guys who are involved in the radio show, a couple of our writers, and a couple of local radio celebrities pop in, and we do a 10-team mock draft. Mostly heavy on the mocking, and a little bit heavy on the beer, but it's a pretty good time.
I dig both those things.
I believe that LeSean McCoy in that draft lasted to the 5th round.
Wow.
Mostly because we all kind of feel the same way about him. It's a new system in Buffalo. He's got quarterback situations that it's probably the worst quarterback situation in the league right now. We don't know if he's going to be healthy. He's had some injury issues in the past, and there's the undead corpse of Fred Jackson there to steal touches near the end zone. So he's not a guy that I'm super excited about. I think that when he is in the game, they're going to try to feed him the ball quite a bit, but I'm also worried that when they feed him that ball, it might not be as quality as you'd want. We saw that a lot last year with a few players who, like Kelvin Johnson, for instance, who was really injured most of the season. And while he played 14 games, he wasn't effective in all 14 of those games. So I think McCoy is going to be one of those guys who he'll be a warrior. He'll suit up and he'll play, but he's just not going to be as effective as I want. And I'm going to let somebody else in my league draft him and deal with it. And if I'm wrong and he's the LeSean McCoy of old, so be it. But I'd rather jump off too early and try to figure out something else than be a year too late.
If there's anything I know from watching TV, it is fear the Walking Dead, especially an undead Fred Jackson. Now,
that's right.
In Chicago, the rookie Kevin White, he's on the pup. Chances are he might even miss his rookie season. I don't want to focus on him per se, but how does this affect his fantasy team? Who gets the biggest boost there? Is it Alshon Jeffrey, Marquise Wilson, Eddie Royal, Bellamy, Bennett? Who gets the biggest bonus because of the Kevin White news?
I think it hurts Alshon the most. Obviously, he's going to get the ball fed to him maybe more, but it's pretty easy to go, well, there's Eddie Royal over there and there's Alshon Jeffrey over there. Who are we going to double cover? It's going to be Alshon. I think Eddie Royal is the other starter and should probably get some decent play. I believe that this coaching staff had him for a little while in Denver when John Fox was there, so they know him just a little bit.
Well, Cutler knows him too.
Yeah.
His rookie year, with Smoke and Jay, Royal had his best yards, best targets.
Yeah, Chicago is just Denver West, it seems, with Cutler, John Fox, Brandon Marshall, who's already gone through, and now Eddie Royal. So, it's I think Eddie Royal's slotted in to get some decent fantasy numbers, kind of some sneaky fantasy numbers. He's going to be a guy that probably will go undrafted in most standard redraft leagues. But he's a guy that if you don't draft him with the last pick in your draft, you should kind of just put him on your watch list just to make sure that if he does blow up in one game, I don't think it's completely a fluke. He might have some up and down games this year. I mean, he'll have a game where he gets 4 catches for 30 yards, but he'll probably have a game or two where he knocks off 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. That Bears defense is horrible, and they're going to be playing from behind a lot, so that means Jay Cutler is going to be throwing the ball a lot, and Eddie Royal's a good enough player to get it done. So I think he's not a sexy name, but he's a guy that you can kind of keep in the back of your mind and throw it on your watch list on your free agent guys.
Could be overreaction. Fantasy football calculators got him going at the back of the 8th right now. Probably a lot of reaction to the Kevin White news. Hey, let's move down south to Houston with Arian Foster. Who steps up there? Are you a Blue believer? In other words, as Will Ferrell said it, is Blue your boy too?
No, I don't think that I want any part of the Houston running game this year. With Foster injured, and we really don't know I've heard reports that Foster might not even hit the PUP list, and he might be back late September.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Arian Foster is just an enigma of a player. If he's looming and you're drafting Alfred Blue high, I think that you're going to be disappointed with what Alfred Blue does. So I think that the way that you tackle the Houston running game, and I think that the only real way you can do it is if you're in an auction league and you happen to get in on both of them at a price that's incredibly low or well below market value. I think you're probably still going to have to draft Alfred Blue too high and probably Arian Foster a little bit too high for my liking. And if somebody sees that you draft one, they're probably going to gobble up the other one on you. So it's kind of like McCoy. It's one of those running game situations where somebody's already hurt, and while Foster may come back, he might not be at full speed, and Blue might just be in question the whole year. Am I the starter? Am I the backup? And is it a 50-50 timeshare? I just don't want to mess with it. I don't want to mess with it at all.
Well, then we've got the wide receivers. We've got certainly Hopkins. We've been debating whether if the Foster injury helps or hurts. Now we've also got the news that Hoyer is the QB. Is this a good thing for Hopkins? Is this a bad thing for Hopkins, both Hoyer and the Foster injury?
Well, I don't think that the Foster injury is bad for Hopkins.
That's what I say.
One of the things that we always say at Fantasy Football Weekly is what's bad for the offense is bad for the offense. Jordy Nelson going down in Green Bay is bad for Aaron Rodgers and Eddie Lacy and Randall Cobb. It's probably good for Davante Adams, but it's bad for those other guys. So what's bad for the offense is bad for the offense. I don't think Hoyer's a bad play. I saw Bill O'Brien's clip from Hard Knocks where he named the starting quarterback, and he just said that Brian was the most consistent player in training camp. And I think Hoyer has proven in the past that he's an all right player. I'd rather him be my backup on my team, but he's a pretty good player, and he can get things done on the field. So I don't think that Brian Hoyer being the quarterback hurts Hopkins any more than Ryan Mallett does. Or, I mean, we had Matt Schaub there in the past, and that didn't work out too well. So it's been a mess at the quarterback position in Houston for a long time. So Hopkins, I'm a little worried because Andre Johnson's gone, frankly, and they can focus on him a lot more. I think Cecil Shorts is a good player. We call him Adobe CS3 at the office, but Shorts is a good player. He's proven to be a good player on a bad offense before, and Brian Hoyer might be the best quarterback he's ever caught balls from. Nate Washington has proven to be a decent deep threat for the last decade, and there's a few other guys on that roster that they're all right, chip in a chair kind of thing. Hopkins isn't a guy that I'm looking at as a wide receiver 1, though. He's a middle-of-the-road wide receiver 2 for me. And there's some guys that I think that might have more upside than Hopkins. And I'm just nervous, frankly, that in the past, Houston just hasn't thrown enough touchdowns to their wide receivers. Obviously, Andre Johnson, who's there forever, never caught more than 9 in a season. So it's a little concerning to me that I think Hopkins had 6 last year, but it's a little concerning that I want that number to be higher out of a guy that I'm going to anoint as one of my surefire wide receiver starters.
That's kind of my sentiments exactly for what's going on down in Houston. Now, you mentioned Davante Adams and of course, the Jordy Nelson. Keeping your Minnesota Vikings venomous attitude out of it. Let's just look objectively at Green Bay. Who benefits the most? Is it indeed Davante? We've heard talk about Ty Montgomery, Jeff Janis, Richard Rodgers. Who steps up the most? Who's at the biggest plus for Jordy going down?
I think it's Davante Adams, and I don't think it's very close because he easily slots into the second starting wide receiver role. Janis is a big measurables guy. I believe he's 6'3" and has like the 4.3 speed and stuff like that. Excuse me. But I think he was a 6th or 7th round pick last year. And then Ty Montgomery was a 3rd round pick.
Right.
So they got a little bit more invested in him. He's a lot smaller. He's built a little bit more like Randall Cobb is, though. So I don't know if Ty Montgomery fits into the system as well as Jeff Janis, but obviously the Packers are a little more invested in Montgomery. So I think that the surefire thing is Adams is now I think firmly a wide receiver too. He's probably a guy that I'd want over DeAndre Hopkins, to be honest with you.
Where are you gonna take Adams in a draft? His ADP, according to Fantasy Football Calculator, is 5th. Again, I think a lot of this is 5th round according to Fantasy Football Calculator. I find him very up to date. I like that you can chart and see where they were 3 weeks ago. I think a lot of it is certainly overreaction. I think that might come down. But knowing that he's 5th, where would you feel comfortable taking Davante Adams in a redraft league?
I think the 5th round's a pretty good spot. If you were a big-time Packer believer, I could see you reaching into the 4th round for him. I think that's pretty strong to do that. But if you can get him in the 5th or 6th round, I think you'd be really happy. And I think that you're going to get some decent numbers out of this. I don't think he slots into Jordy's numbers specifically, but he showed a little bit at the end of last season and a couple games down the stretch that he's a good enough player to make some great fantasy numbers for you. And really, it's the best. I'm not objective. It's the best offense in the league right now, I think. I think Aaron Rodgers is probably the best player in the NFL. And I still think their coaching staff is terrible. But Mike McCarthy obviously removed himself from play calling duties. Maybe that helps a little bit. But I think Rodgers is a quarterback that can overcome all that stuff. And I can't bet against the Packers too much from fantasy standpoint.
Now, we talked about this at length, I believe, my last Pyro Light podcast, but the Kelvin Benjamin injury. Just briefly, as I agree with you, what's bad for the team is bad for the whole team. But with the Kelvin Benjamin injury, who do you feel benefits the most?
Well, Devin Funchess obviously slides in to be the #1 wide receiver.
Can he handle it?
Who knows? Do we think Kelvin Benjamin could handle it last year? I mean, there were a lot of detractors last year on Benjamin, and he turned out to have a pretty good year. They're built pretty similarly. Obviously, Benjamin had a little bit of the higher draft pedigree, but Funchess is a good player in his own right, and I think people are a little too down on him. But you got to remember that Cam Newton has thrown over 21 touchdown passes only once in his career, and he threw 24. He averages about 20 touchdowns a year. If you kind of move that around and break it down, maybe it's 6 for Greg Olsen, and maybe it's 6 for Funchess, and a couple for the running backs, and a couple for the rest of the wide receivers. And it's a little nerve-wracking taking any part of the Panthers' passing game this year. I think Olsen will probably be the primary focus in the red zone, but who knows if it's not just Cam Newton going, you know what, I'm going to be Cam Newton and I'm going to take off running. I could see a scenario this year where Cam Newton has 16 touchdown passes, but has 14 rushing touchdowns. I could see that scenario playing out fairly easily this year. So,
I thought CP was the only Cam lover amongst you guys.
Yeah, but I think that offense and that team, I mean, the general manager even of the Panthers even came out and said, we have to let Cam be Cam, and we can't force him to be a pocket passer, and we can't force him to be a player he's not. He's a big, good runner, and why stop that? I've frankly been surprised that the last few years that they've seemed to have taken the ball out of his hands near the goal line. And Jonathan Stewart is obviously a injury risk. He's missed at least 3 games in each of the past 3 years.
That's why I'm loving Cap, his backup, as a sleeper.
Cameron Artis-Payne, yeah.
You got it.
He's a good handcuff or a good shot in the dark kind of a guy, a late do the opposite kind of pick. So, but yeah, I could see a scenario where Cam Newton jumps up in the rushing touchdowns this year. I think he only had 4 last year, something really low. So, yeah, I could definitely see that happening, though.
I like the advice, let Cam be Cam, let me be me. I keep saying the exact same thing to my wife. Let me be me. I want to dance, damn it. Sorry. Anyway, what about Alex Smith? And, oh, you know what? We're performing without a net, so I've got one of my daughters gracing the stage here. So,
all right.
And she exits stage left. I got a serious question for you there.
Okay.
How did you celebrate Alex Smith tossing a touchdown to a wide receiver? I mean, was there cake to be had? Did you go out to the strip club? Was there Billy D. Williams Old English 40s? How do you roll when it comes to a wide receiver touchdown in KC over a year in the making?
Oh, man. Definitely not Old English. Gosh, we had a party one time where we all had to drink 40s, and
ooh.
Man, it was not a good party.
Was this the high school days?
Liquor.
High school days.
So this is totally off topic, but my friends and I every year or two we do a all-night campfire, and every hour of our all-night campfire we have a different theme, and somebody gets to pick a new theme. So as soon as it hits the hour, we have a new theme, and one of our themes during the all-night campfire was 40s. And we were all just drinking these terrible malt liquors, and it was one of the worst experiences of that hour, really. But I highly recommend the hourly progressive parties, especially if you're going to go all-nighters with your friends. It's pretty fun.
I like the theme party, switching up every hour, but drinking 40s all hour, I'm pretty sure that's one of Dante's levels of hell. That does not sound enjoyable.
We had a Boone's Farm hour in one of them too. I think that was a different party, but
woo!
Yeah, it got pretty silly.
Well,
so
back to the Kansas City.
Back to Kansas City.
The only real receiver unless you've got someone, but let's talk Maclin real quick, unless you want to bring up someone else. How do you think he's going to fare this year? He's going in the 5th, according to Fantasy Football Calculator. What are your thoughts on Maclin?
Well, I'm worried that Alex Smith can't get the ball to Maclin still. He's a quarterback that doesn't make mistakes, but he also doesn't take a lot of risks. He's going to be a guy who doesn't win Kansas City games, but doesn't lose Kansas City games for the most part. So he's going to keep the passes short. When he gets down to the red zone, he's going to go to his tall guy, Travis Kelce, or they're going to hand the ball to Jamal Charles or Niall Davis, who actually had quite a bit of run inside the 5 last year. I think that they have their offense set up to do that under Andy Reid. I think Maclin's going to have to break his touchdowns off of short passes, which makes me really nervous. If you're catching a pass 10, 15 yards downfield and you're required to make up the rest of the 30 to 60 yards, that's got me a little worried. So Maclin's not a guy that I want in the 5th round. I again, going back to Davante Adams, I'd probably rather have Davante Adams than Jeremy Maclin this year. Better offense, better situation. Both are kind of going in the 5th round, right? So yeah. If I had the choice between the two, it's kind of an easy choice for me. I'm going to take the guy in the better, higher scoring offense.
I believe I concur. I'd rather have a Green Bay quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, throwing it to me than Smith any day. Now,
and we're back to Aaron Rodgers versus Alex Smith all over again. There it is.
It's like the dragon swallowing its own tail. According to Fantasy Football Calculator, now I want to bring this up to you because for the audience that does not know, you are a Minnesotan, as your shirt says, and as we've picked up. But recently, according to FFC, Fantasy Football Calculator, Mike Wallace was just overtaken, his ADP, Charles Johnson is now, according to Fantasy Football Calculator, the first Viking receiver off the board. They're right behind each other. Charles was going in the 7th, and I think even Wallace is going late 7th. But the point is, all summer it seemed that Wallace was going first, and now all of a sudden, Johnson's going first. Obviously, ADPs change from site to site. I saw even just today, NFL fantasy prices, right? They said Charles Johnson was going in the 8th. Regardless, they're pretty close. Which one are you taking first? Which Vikings wide receiver?
Well, between the two, I think Mike Wallace has the upside. We've seen him do it in the past, and Teddy Bridgewater's never in his one season of play had the real big deep threat that we've been hoping for in Minnesota. I think him and Charles Johnson have a very good rapport. I think Johnson is the possession guy. I think in a PPR league, you can feel all right with him, but if you're looking for upside and you're looking for one of those two guys to maybe pop into the 8, 9, 10 touchdown range, I think it's Mike Wallace doing it. And I think the helpful part is that Adrian Peterson comes back and joins that offense this year. So if you got to put 8 in the box, 9 in the box maybe against Peterson in some situations, that's just going to open things up for Mike Wallace to scream downfield. Some are questioning Teddy's arm strength. And he doesn't have the strongest arm in the NFL, but I think he's got enough arm strength that he can put it down there. And he hasn't had a player like that. Greg Jennings was not that player anymore last year. Jarius Wright, not really that player. Cordero Patterson has proven that he hasn't figured out how to run a route yet, as evidenced by a really bad interception in the last preseason game against Oakland, where I think Sean Hill threw a ball. No one was there but an Oakland player. And they looked, and, it was Cordero who was supposed to run a route to that spot, and he ran the other way. So Patterson's a guy that I'm not taking a chance on this year, but Mike Wallace is a guy that I think there's high upside there, and I think that they get him involved a lot, especially in the Norv Turner offense.
See, I really like Charles Johnson. I'd probably go with him first. But as Wallace did show us last year, he's not just a down-the-field guy. Heck, 9 out of his 10 touchdowns came in the red zone last year.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about that too with last year. I think he had the most weak-armed quarterback maybe in the country in Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill's insanely accurate and did really well, but obviously passing to Jarvis Landry 84 times last year. I believe Jarvis Landry averaged under 10 yards per catch. And of the guys who had caught 80 passes or more, I think he was like 3 or 4 yards per catch behind the rest of the guys. So he's going to be a dink and dunk quarterback. And I think that's what Mike Wallace got stuck in last year. And he probably got really frustrated with it, which I think was why Miami was so eager to ship him away, is he didn't get the downfield routes that he wanted to run like he did in Pittsburgh. And I think that he'll have that ability a little bit more in Minnesota.
Minnesota's an exciting offense with a healthy Rudolph. Like you say, they can't stack the box with AP. They got these great wide receivers, a quarterback that's looking up. I'm excited to see Minnesota this year. Lots of fantasy weapons. Mm-hmm. Finally, my last question for you. I asked this to Matt Waldman as well. There's a classic song originally performed by Amos Milburn, but probably made famous by John Lee Hooker. 1 bourbon, 1 scotch, and 1 beer. So along those lines, give me 1 breakout, 1 sleeper, and 1 bust.
I think the sleeper in my mind, we'll start with that. I'm going to go Nelson Aguilar of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Love him.
Rookie wide receiver. Jordan Matthews did not get much run inside of the 5-yard line for the Eagles. I believe he only had like 2 or 3 targets last year inside the 5. And Aguilar is a smaller guy, and he figures to play the slot a lot. And I think that the Eagles will have the ability to kind of throw him some little underneath routes that he can shake loose and do some good stuff with. So a lot of people are really high on Jordan Matthews after Maclin left. I think that Nelson Aguilar picks up a lot of that, and it's not just Jordan Matthews picking up the slack there.
I agree totally.
My bust. This is going to be slightly controversial. Le'Veon Bell. I don't want Le'Veon Bell this year, and I'm stuck with him in a dynasty league. Here's why. He misses the first 2 weeks due to a suspension. Then he comes off suspension to face 4 of the top 10 run defenses in his next 5 weeks: St. Louis, Baltimore, Arizona, and Kansas City. He's got a bye in week 11. He's got Seattle in week 12. And then he's got Baltimore again in week 16, your fantasy championship. So in 9 of 16 fantasy weeks, he's either out or he has a tough matchup. He's not a guy, and I believe that Football Injury Predictor site had him listed as the most probable running back to get injured this year. So he's a guy that I think everybody's really excited about, but we see massive failure at the top 5 running back position every year. And I think that he's a guy who has all the earmarks of somebody who could have a catastrophic year and absolutely lose your fantasy league. How about a breakout? I think Joseph Randle is the breakout this year. Their schedule might be the easiest in the NFL to start the season. He's got 4 straight games to start the year against bottom 10 run defenses. He's got one of the best offensive lines in the league. And put those combinations together, they're going to give him the shot first. He's got easy defenses and a great offensive line. I think in the first 4 weeks, you're going to see that Joseph Randle, if you draft him in the 4th or 5th round, he could return you 2nd-round value if you wanted to trade him after the first couple of weeks. And I think once he gets that confidence of getting 4 weeks in against some of the bad teams in the league, it might be he might just be DeMarco Murray volume 2 this year. So he's a guy that I think he's poised for a breakout. And if he doesn't, it might be somebody else in that system. Darren McFadden's a guy that I mentioned on the podcast about 4 or 5 times. Jerry Jones loves his Arkansas Razorback boys, and that's Darren McFadden right there. If he can stay healthy, McFadden's never had an opportunity like this in the NFL. He's never had an offense that's this good. He's never had an offensive line or a quarterback or a wide receiver lineup with him that's anywhere close to this good. If he can just stay healthy, man, the pedigree's there, and I would be really excited to have a healthy Darren McFadden on my team if he was competing for the starting spot.
Well, I think I'm with you on 2 of the 3. I am all over Aggie. He's going in the 6th. Jordan Matthews is going in the 3rd. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Aggie surpasses. I think they've easily got 2 1,000-yard receivers. I think Aggie could be the best receiver on the team. I love him. Bust Le'Veon Bell, I like it. You know, gosh, if he misses, just gets tweaks an ankle, something due to injury, those games are starting to stack up, and that's going to take a fantasy toll. And like you say with Randall, not as confident on him, but boy, that line, they're hard to argue with. And I've been burned on McFadden before, but the boy's got talent. And if he can stay healthy behind that line, there could be some magic there.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to conclude our fantasy football talk. I'd like to thank Mat Harrison for gracing my screen for the 2nd time. Matt, it has been my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Folks, this has been another fantasy football talk. You can follow Matt on Twitter at Explosive Output. Of course, I am PyromaniacMo at PyromaniacMo. You can follow the rest of the Pyromaniac boys on Twitter at PYROMAN1AC. Of course, check out our podcasts, The Heavy and the Light. We're available on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher. We've got our draft kit out. Pyro Pro is available for you. And, of course, we've always got free content. Plus, you can interact with us on Facebook /Pyromaniac. It's been a pleasure, guys. We will catch you next time.